The issue of gender equity, gender equality, gender parity, whatever you want to call it, is a lot more top of mind today than perhaps ever before. And in part, that's because we live in a world where people are generally more conscious of when one class of people is treated better or worse than another class of people. So the other day, I had a chance to spend some time in conversation with José Zeilstra. And basically, she is the CEO of a company called Gender Fair, which describes itself as a public benefit corporation. And basically what they do is they look at public companies and the information made public by these public companies and basically rank them in terms of how gender fair they are. And then what they do is they use that information and they make it available to consumers via the website or an app so that consumers can make a decision about who they want to patronize and who they don't based on where they stand on gender issues. It's a really interesting conversation. I think it's a really interesting idea. One of the things that I found amazing based on our conversation was, and a survey they just recently did, is that just 16% of the companies that they rank, okay, basically get passing grades in terms of gender issues. 16%. And at least one of the companies that does get a passing grade may surprise you. It surprised me a little bit. It shows the degree to which companies are able to make progress if they actually pay attention to these issues. So I hope you will enjoy my conversation with José. I thought it was interesting. Take a look. So José, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
So Gender Fair, as I look at your site, I mean, it's you know, the name is sort of self-explanatory, and you talk about the notion of accelerating equality. So put some meat on that. Explain a little bit about what exactly you're set up to do.
Sure. So I spent 15 years in corporate America, much of the time in strategy, but also doing a lot of leadership development. So working with not just women, but diverse populations to help provide training and mentoring and sponsorship and help them get to that next level. And despite a lot of targets and goals and commitments, there wasn't a lot of change, in terms of getting more diverse leadership in place. And I think part of it was just because we were focusing on the individual. We weren't necessarily focusing on the culture and the bias and the structure. Now, having said that, in the last couple of years, you see a lot more of that happening where, there is culture change happening within organizations and looking at what the process for promotion and for getting more diversity in the leadership ranks. But at the time, there wasn't enough incentive for companies to do that. And it's still not happening fast enough. And I think part of it is because many companies just see diversity as a good thing to do, but there's no pain in the system that's really accelerating that. So Gender Fair is just a way for consumers to get engaged in helping companies make it more of a priority than it currently is. And that's for consumers to look at those brands that have progressed and to reward them through purchasing and then incentivizing other companies to do better. And you're going in and you are ranking companies based on whether they're gender fair or not.
I mean, I gather from looking at your site, I mean, there's basically two different ranking systems. You're either gender fair or you're not. And then there's this 100-point system that allows companies to be able to figure out where they are in the system, because companies, I mean, can use you as a way of figuring out the degree to which they're meeting these equality aspirations, if you will, right?
Yeah, so we have 16 metrics that we use. They're based on the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. And again, a lot of the companies had signed up for what we call the UN WEPs, but there was no way to measure if they're making any progress. Right. So we created this measurement, this scorecard, It's a 100-point scale, as you said, and any company that has achieved 70 points or higher is gender fair. So that's the standard. And we do independent research on companies alongside these metrics. And these metrics could, include anything from having women on the board, women of color on the board, in the executive suite, senior management, as well as employee policies as it relates to, pay equity and sexual harassment, paid family leave, flexibility. We look at advertising and the images that companies portray, whether it's in ads or on their websites. We look at diversity reporting, and do companies report on their workforce composition? And lastly, we look at companies and if they provide philanthropic dollars towards causes affecting women and girls. Now, this is something that companies provide data on to the SEC or in their annual reports or their websites. So we just gather that data independently and then score companies on a 100-point scale. And then we publish the results. And this is just all for the publicly traded companies, mostly the consumer facing, which is about 800, and representing about 2,500 brands.
And the companies that are, company doesn't have to be asked to be ranked, right? You're looking at lots of different companies. I noticed, but obviously I haven't gotten to all of them yet. For example, I noticed that Kroger is ranked, and we can get back to that later. Albertsons is not. And so is that just a matter of you haven't gotten to Albertsons yet?
No, it's because we started with the publicly traded companies. So this is public companies have to report on some of these numbers. And so it's easily available in the public domain.
Okay. It's interesting because, a company like Walmart, which does not have a great reputation in terms of its gender policies, and yet is ranked by you guys as being gender fair. I was saying curious. I went and I looked because you have a place where you can go on your website and you can enter in the name of any company. And while at Walmart's getting passing grades, Amazon is very definitely not getting passing grades in either Amazon Kindle, Amazon Prime, and AWS. So why is Walmart at variance with what I guess its reputation is I guess my first question.
Well, and the reputation, I agree, was bad about 5-6 years ago. And they made tremendous progress. So if you were to ask me this question 5-6 years ago, I would have said, yes, they're not nowhere near gender fair, but they have made significant changes. And if you look at the app Gender Fair and you look for Walmart, you can see exactly why they're and it's really the facts, because they have 40% of the women, 40% of their executive committee are women. They have, a third of their board members are women. They have very good maternity, paternity leave, and work-life balance. One of the things that they have started doing twice a year now is to publicize their workforce composition. And that's obviously something that we measure. Even if they are not really strong in some areas, whether, in terms of the diversity numbers, they publicize it. And I think they get credit for that because we want transparency and companies to do that. So Walmart does this on their own twice a year. They put themselves out there and saying, this is what we look like right now. We're trying to do better. But it builds that trust with consumers and employees and investors even to say, we can all help Walmart do better. And they have made tremendous progress in the last, like I said, 4 to 5 years. So, and yet a company like Kroger is not gender fair according to your rankings. So what does, I guess you can put it two ways, like what does Kroger do badly, or where are the areas in which Kroger needs to improve? Well, I'm just going to look that up and look in the facts, and then looks like they do well with women on board, but their paid maternity, paternity leave is only 2 weeks. Walmart's is 16 weeks. So that's a big difference.
That is a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a big difference. And so that, obviously, and then they don't publicize anything that they provide in terms of work-life balance. Now they may have it, but again, we're trying for companies to be very transparent. So even if Kroger does have great policies, if they're not sharing that, then they don't get credit for that.
Did the whole work-life balance issue become more clouded over the past year when so many people are working from home? I can't tell you how many people I know, men and women, who said, I've never been home for dinner so much in my life, and actually kind of liked it. And now we're trying to figure out, coming out of the pandemic, how are they going to keep that if their companies want them to come back to the office?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are right now surveying their employees to see who wants to go back and how many days do they want to come back. I don't think any company is enforcing anything right now. I think young people especially want to come back to an office, whereas, the more older folks, kind of like having that work-life balance and being home, I myself included. I think, but you miss that camaraderie, you miss that office, talk and just being around other colleagues, not over Zoom. So I think there's going to be, more desire for people to come back, maybe not full time. But what we have found just from this pandemic is that, people are still productive. They're probably working more hours sometimes because they're not commuting 2 hours each way.
Right.
And they are getting the work done, but it does have a negative impact on the culture. It's very hard to, keep a culture and strengthen that culture when people are so dispersed. So I think there will be a move back to the office.
It's interesting. You guys just came out with a survey, which was surveying men and women about organizational practices related to gender equality. And one of the things I found really interesting about it, and maybe not particularly surprising, but I found this fascinating, was that when you ask these questions of men and women about, like, how are important are certain organizational practices, whether it's family-friendly benefits or sexual harassment or paid maternity leave, all those sort of things. Men actually, as a higher percentage of men than women, actually sort of rank these things as being important organizationally. And yet, when you drill down a little bit and start to figure out what are the most important things, men have completely different priorities than women, and women are very solid on things like dealing with sexual harassment, misogyny, and other practices, and working to eliminate the wage gap. And men tend not to see those things, I guess, as being as important, and which tells me that, among other things, my gender has a long way to go to understanding what's really important and what's less so. Is that a fair reading on my part of the survey results?
Well, the survey results, and again, just to cover them, they looked at all the metrics that we use. And you're right, in terms of the most important ones for men and women was preventing sexual harassment, misogyny, other practices that are unfair to women. Next one being eliminating the wage gap, and providing a fair work environment, fair wages and career support and things like that. I think, and the, on the other side of the equation is the least important ones, where having women on the board and and in leadership. So what it tells me is that both genders want just a safe work environment. I think from a woman's perspective, they want this because they just want, it's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I just want to go to work. I don't want to be harassed. I want to get paid fairly, and I want career prospects and training. Whereas men say, I don't want to be a target, for being,
Right.
I want a safe environment because I don't want to deal with that because I don't want to be accused, or I don't want this to be part of the culture or anything like that. So it's from different perspectives, but important for both genders nonetheless.
And my gut reaction to what you just said, though, is that if men don't want to be accused, then don't do anything that you could be accused. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify it, and I suppose there are probably places where people get accused of things they haven't done, or things get misinterpreted. But it has never struck me as being that difficult to not be accused of doing bad stuff. Just don't do bad and stupid stuff.
Right.
I guess I am oversimplifying it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing,
that's all right. You can, I've always had trouble with, I guess I've always had trouble with the idea that men, sometimes portray themselves as being victims. It's like, give me a break, man. If you hadn't said something stupid or done something stupid, you could have avoided 90% of the problems with which you're dealing. You're smiling. You're going, this poor naive person.
No. Well, I think you're right. I think there's some things that some men do that are stupid. It may not be necessarily illegal, or but it's just like they say a stupid joke, and it may offend one person. Not they just don't want to be they want to be in an environment where it's more about let's work, let's all get along, let's not but the problem is men are often bystanders, right? They often witness this behavior by other men, but they don't necessarily want to do anything about it. They just want it to go away, right? So there's one is, are they bystanders or upstanders, or they just want to deal with this issue at the end of the day. They just don't want to deal with that environment.
Talk about your efforts. You have an app, so your goal is to put real power and pressure on these companies through the power of the wallet, right? Is the goal actually to get somebody to say, I'm gonna look at this app and I'm gonna decide to go to that store rather than that store because this store has more progressive gender policies, or I'm gonna buy this brand instead of that brand?
Well, think about it like fair trade. Maybe not everybody shops fair trade, or think about it like organic. Not everyone shops organic, but there's kosher, but there's enough people that do, right? And some people, if you think about all the women that marched in Washington, and worldwide, there's 6 million women that march. So they will get up at 4 a.m. and go to Washington and march for their rights. So gender fair is really for those who really care about having gender equality and diversity within the workplace and holding brands accountable. And it's really, we see this, across all ages, and now we see it across genders too. But young people especially say, you know what, we're tired of hearing about companies that say they are a certain way. Like, think about after George Floyd, what we saw is that all these websites of companies, all of a sudden their images changed from, white to diverse, right? People on their websites, and their ads and commercials, they were all very diverse and empowering for, diverse and folks and underrepresented folks. But when you peel back the layers, it's still the same old structure, right? And leadership. And despite all these commitments and statements from CEOs, which I, admire, but I think young people are saying, you know what, we're going to hold you accountable, and we have the power to do so. And gender fair is just one way to say, you know what, these companies, this is how diverse they are. This is what they look like inside an organization. It's up to you whether you care about that. But the app is very user friendly, so you can scan any logo of all the consumer facing companies. And if the brand is, scores below 70, which is the standard, it'll automatically recommend a product in the same category with a higher score. that is gender fair. So it's very easy to just to say, you know what, is this brand gender fair? If not, you know, maybe I should switch toothpaste or soap or shampoo. You know, it's those kind of items, which, you know, really is like, you know, we spend 762, $1 billion a year on these consumer products, right? And maybe switching a brand because I really value this is something that say 10% of the population cares about that, and would switch. But that sends a signal to those companies saying, oh, maybe I should, do something about this, rather than put out an ad or a statement, because now consumers are making, choices.
And so nobody should think that this is not a big problem, at least according to your rankings. Only 16% of the companies that you looked at are actually qualify as being gender fair. I mean, that's awful.
Yes, and the bar is not that high either. So absolutely right. We're not talking, gender equal. We're talking gender fair. Companies can get points just having 20% of women on the board or in leadership. So it's not a difficult standard to get, but we will continue to, raise the bar,
right,
as more companies do better.
One of the things that occurred to me, and you were talking about young people a minute ago, is that another value of this that I don't know that you've incorporated it into the way you're working or not, would be for young people who are thinking of trying to figure out where they want to work, right? It's not just a matter of what products they buy, but if they want to be able to use a metric like yours to say, oh no, I don't want to work for that company because that company is not going to be as, is not going to pursue these ideals in the same way. And also, by the way, tell women, hey, Walmart has actually come a long way. You shouldn't dismiss them out of hand because they get because they've gotten a lot of bad press over the years.
That's right. So we are going on campus and doing career, fairs and with graduates, and they're very interested in our data. And but on the flip side, we're also hearing from companies that it's a very competitive marketplace, and as they look to rehire, people, and especially diverse people, they're going to be, this is going to be a tool to for companies to do better again on their score, but also for those looking for work to see which companies really support gender and diversity.
Is it your sense, I mean, you've been doing this for a while now, is it your sense that there is beyond what you just described, which strikes me as being, it could at least in certain cases be opportunistic, saying, hey, listen, there's real trouble finding people to work. We've got to do better at this just to get a percentage of the population in the door. But do you sense that there is an honest effort taking place in the marketplace where companies are actually, taking this seriously, even companies that are not talking about what they're doing, like we discussed before? I mean, is there real movement happening?
There is, but I think the movement is a little slow. And there are few companies that really are kind of walking that talk. And then there's others that really just need to do better. I mean, we see a lot of progress in putting women on the board and women of color on the board and people of color on the board, frankly. In the last year, we've seen a big effort there, and that's great. And we've seen, obviously advertising, I mentioned, more empowering. We've seen a lot of financial, like philanthropic dollars go towards causes that impact, communities of color. But those are easy things to do, right? That it's easy to expand your board, and and often it's the same people that are on multiple boards. It's easy to to throw money at causes. It's easy to do an ad, and it's expensive, but it's easy to do. What's hard is to do the work inside the organization of promoting people, into the right jobs, and mentoring and sponsoring, and looking at your pay, looking at making sure those actors that are bad when it comes to sexual harassment or harassment of any kind, really, and getting rid of those. And like, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's the hard part for companies, and that's where things are slow. And that's going to take some time. The culture change, right? Yeah. Changing the culture, against bias, and that's going to take years. But consumers, employees are impatient. They want to see change right away. And although change is happening, it's not the change inside the company to get, to put the culture change in place, that's welcoming for everyone. Because if I'm trying to look for a company and I'm being recruited because I'm either, a person of color or obviously a woman, and I don't see, I look at the leadership and it's all the same older male white guys. I'm not gonna apply or accept a job there. Right. So it's, it's two ways. It's really hard for a company to recruit if people don't see that diversity on the top of the organization. So it's, they have to make those kinds of changes. And Walmart's done that. They're really an example of that.
Do you get pushback ever in terms of the fact that you are in your case looking specifically at gender fairness? There's obviously a lot of other areas in this country that, where there's less equality because of ethnicity, skin color, religion. I mean, there's a lot of other areas. I'm not sure exactly even what the question is I'm asking, except that do people ever look at you and say, why are you only focusing on this and not the broader lack of equality that exists in a lot of places?
Yes, I do get that. And I do want to point out that we do look at women of color. So we do look at, all women. But it's really hard to define diversity. And I think companies are starting to get more of a definition of diversity, because it could be, it could include LGBTQ, and they have their HRC program, the Human Rights Commission, which has done phenomenally well for the LGBTQ community. We also, but there's the veterans, there's, autistic, there's, physically right. challenged. So there's so many different diverse, or, diversity, populations right. that it's really hard to focus. And right now we're just focused on women, all women. But, we do tap into diversity of companies because they have to report it. It's very hard to be able to score a company if they don't report on diversity. So that's why our diversity reporting is one of the metrics. But it's, people have to self-identify as well, right. so that companies can report, and that then again, mm-hmm. we can score them.
I got to imagine one of the other pushbacks is that you might get, or that companies at least might feel, even if they don't express it, would be, and you just listed all of those, a number of groups or segments of the population that have not, in all cases, or in many cases, have not been treated equally to basically white guys. And I got to imagine, I mean, it was funny, you were talking before about, I'll change I'll decide to change my brand of toothpaste because of how companies ranked on these issues. I gotta believe there are gotta be brands out there, whether they're retail brands or CPG companies, whatever, that are sitting there. Why can't I just sell toothpaste? I've got every advocacy group, every special interest group in the world taking aim at me, having nothing to do with whether or not my toothpaste actually cleans your teeth.
Yeah.
And I'm not, by the way, defending that position. I'm just saying, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there saying, why can't I just sell toothpaste? Yeah. Do you hear that a lot?
Well, that's the thing of the past.
Right.
Like I said, even Unilever was one of the first companies that's saying, we only sell purpose-driven brands. Right. Every brand has a purpose. And whether you want to go back or not, I think consumers and employees won't let companies off the hook for just selling toothpaste. There's so much choice out there, and they care about values. What does the company stand for? And 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 what does the company stand for? what they look for when they select, or they'll boycott, quite frankly. So CEOs are in a tough spot because there's no more standing on the sideline, whether it's voter suppression or whether it's on climate or whether it's on diversity. CEOs can't be silent anymore, and they have to look at Nike. You have to take a stand, and you lose some, you win some, but there's no more silence, and there's no more selling toothpaste without some kind of value behind the company, right?
And of course, because I can see a world in which equality in general, but gender equality would not be considered a political issue. And yet we live in a world where everything is a political issue. And so, you are pursuing these goals in a world where there's a lot of dissonance. There's a lot of fracturing of the population, and I don't think that makes it easier for anybody.
No. It's and the hardest. It's a hard job for the CEO because they don't want to be political.
Right.
But they're almost forced to be political. Look at Delta Airlines. And I spoke with him not too long ago. You can't be silent. Like I said, you have to dip in there, and your employees expect it, your consumers expect it. No.
Well, that seems like a really good place to end. That you and Gender Fair should be treated as a CEO's best friend. I think that's a great place to end. If people want to reach out and find out more about Gender Fair and reach out to you personally, how do they do that?
I'm happy to receive emails and I'll respond. It's j.zeilstra@genderfair.com. And Kevin can post that somewhere. And
I will.
Please reach out. I'm happy to answer any other questions. And thank you for having me.
Well, listen, Josie, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I hope we opened a few eyes, and I hope you get a few more companies from the Morning Newsbeat universe who will kind of reach out and do something about whatever their practices happen to be.
And download the app. Don't forget.
Sounds great. Take care. Thanks a lot.